Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so excited to see all the action going on in the chat right now. Wow, Honolulu, Hawaii. That's pretty amazing. Welcome to the second session of the Mindfulness series sponsored by Shark Ninja. My name is Katie Sherrill. I'm the Director of Development for the American Heart Association. Today's conversation will focus on energy management and be led by Jon Wortmann. Jon is an executive and mental coach, trainer, and speaker. He's delivered over 3,000 public workshops and trainings across 9 industry sectors. A graduate of Carleton College and Harvard, his books have been #1 bestsellers in 22 categories on Amazon. His work has been featured in O Magazine, Elle, The Huffington Post, Fox, Fast Company, and Psychology Today. Jon also coaches on the PGA Tour and assists the golf team at the University of Connecticut. Jon is joined today by our special guest, Caitlan Kane. Caitlan is a local mother of 3 and a survivor of peripartum cardiomyopathy. PPCM is a rare form of heart disease that occurs during the last month of pregnancy or up to 5 months after giving birth. Caitlan is a founder of Sisters at Heart, which aims to improve the lives of those affected by heart disease and stroke through funding research projects and providing financial assistance to families in need that are battling a health issue associated with disease and stroke. Thank you, Caitlan and Jon, for joining us today. And with that, Jon, I will turn it over to you.
It's a privilege today to talk to all of you today about energy. Now, food is what creates energy in our body, but that's not what this session is about. It's about the drains and boosters that actually give you the ability to live the life that you love, to heal, to be in community. And so I'm grateful to Caitlan today because she is our expert in energy management, not just as she is healed, but as she lives her life. No one more than a parent of 3 to understand what it really means to manage energy. And what we're going to take you through is the story of drains and boosters in 6 categories, so that when you leave this workshop, you know how to prioritize the way you spend your time, the way you work with people, and the way you focus your life so that you get recharged more than you get drained. Caitlan, the best way to start this workshop today is to hear your story. Tell us what happened to you a number of years ago.
Sure. So as Katie mentioned, I had something called PPCM, which is periparting cardiomyopathy. It's a rare form of cardiomyopathy that can happen during or right after pregnancy. So as Jon said, I have 3 kids. On my 3rd, during my pregnancy, around 28 weeks, I started having some difficulty, high blood pressure, ended up on bed rest. And that's where I stayed pretty much till about 36 weeks. During that time, though, I was retaining a lot of water. My blood pressure was up. It seemed like the doctors kind of knew something was wrong, but they were just looking in the wrong place. So at 39 weeks, I went into labor. And I went to the hospital and I had my 3rd, Madeline. And things went pretty well with the birth. But subsequently after the birth, I started having some issues. And I noticed that my heart felt just off. It was kind of missing whole beats and I was concerned. So I let a nurse know and I told her that I thought something was wrong. And she alerted the OBGYN, who came in and didn't even really listen to my heart, just kind of thought it might be nerves, anxiety, just kind of told me to rest up and that I was going to be going home the following day. So the following day came and I was still having issues and I kind of reiterated my fears that something wasn't right with my heart to the next OB that came on. And again, they kind of heard what I had to say, but just sort of chalked it off to, you just had a baby, your hormones are a little out of whack, anxiety, lactation, all those things, and scheduled me a follow-up appointment about a week later and checked me out of the hospital. So my parents were down in Rhode Island and they had my older 2 children and I went down there to get them. And that night, my first night out of the hospital, I just started really struggling. Anytime I tried to lay down, I felt like I was drowning. It felt like I had a lot of water in my lungs, almost like an asthma attack, but I'd never had asthma. And in the middle of the night, I decided that it'd be best if I went to the ER. So I went to the ER in Rhode Island and they checked me out and told me that I had a really bad case of pneumonia, which was kind of crazy because I had just left a hospital not even 24 hours prior. But, you know, as we all do, we kind of just trust what they say. And I said, all right, I have got pneumonia. You know, they put me on breathing treatments, steroids, antibiotics, and checked me out of the hospital. So at that point, my husband and I decided it'd be best to come back to Massachusetts, close to my own doctors. And we came home, and second night, very similar issues. I tried to go to bed, whole body sweat, felt like I was choking, couldn't breathe. Spent the night pretty much just sitting in bed, holding my newborn baby, and decided to go back to my local ER, where they took me in and again, reran the chest x-ray, a lot of the just tests that they would run in an ER, and confirmed the diagnosis of pneumonia, and said that they were going to admit me for one night to try and just give me IV antibiotics, some more breathing treatment, which is all steroid based. At that point, my resting heart rate was about 160 and my blood pressure was quite high. So I was waiting in the ER actually to be admitted. And it just so happened that my GP was walking through the hospital and a nurse stopped him and mentioned that one of his patients was there in the ER waiting to be admitted. And he was just the kind of doctor that took a personal interest in people and came to see me and asked me what was going on. And when I shared my story, he recognized that just something didn't add up. So he asked me to run one additional test, and it was a bedside echo, which for people that don't know, an echo is just an ultrasound of your heart. He had a suspicion that something wasn't right with my heart. And so he did that echo, and he asked me for my husband's cell phone, which is never good when you're in a hospital and they ask for your significant other's cell phone. You sort of know something is amiss. So he then informed me that I was in heart failure. And so a normal ejection fraction, which is your left pump of your heart, averages around 55 to 65% for an adult. And mine at the time was functioning at 15%. So it was not good. He, at that point, crash carted me to the ICU. There was a debate about whether to Metaflight me into a Boston hospital, but I really wasn't stable enough. So my husband got there and he sat us down. I was laying down. He sat down and kind of laid out that the situation I was in, it was 33% odds, like 33% that I didn't make the night, 33% chance that I'd need a heart transplant, or 33% chance that I'd respond to the meds and that we could, you know, hopefully get to the other side of this through medication and a hospital stay. So I was very fortunate. I did respond to the meds, and I spent about a week in the ICU, and it's not really something you're ever cured from. So I'm in the long process of healing and getting to a place where, you know, your heart is more stable than that, which luckily I've been successful in.
So how long did it take you for your energy to return to something that was like normal? Because when the body goes through a trauma like that and your heart is healing, it obviously throws everything off. And so what did it feel like over the weeks after you had your experience?
It was really difficult. I mean, to be completely honest, like a more normal level of energy was probably about a 5-year process. I think year one, of course, was the hardest. I had a few speed bumps along the way where I went back into heart failure, which wasn't easy, but energy, you know, I think when you go through a medical crisis, it's different forms of energy. And I know we're kind of talking about that today, but there's physical energy, which is you just don't have the strength to get up and do all the things you'd normally do in a day. There's mental energy, which is sort of consumed by fear over your health, whether you're going to survive. I mean, you have a newborn, plus I had 2 other kids. And then there's mental is different to me than like spiritual, emotional energy. And that's, you know, there's always that big question mark of why, like, why did this happen? Why did nobody catch this? And you're faced with that. So it's really energy depleting on all fronts. And I think each of those sort of takes its own time to come back. And I think that's some of the things we'll talk about today in our conversation. But I'd say probably about 5 years before I started to feel similar to the person I was prior to diagnosis.
And what all of us at home have just experienced in the last 18 months is the trauma of COVID and changes. And so what you just described as a 5-year process of healing, we don't want each of us to now have to go through another 5 years as our lives are changing in this very, very odd time. And so what we're about to jumpstart is 6 buckets of energy that you can fill. And rather than being drained by these categories, you're going to be able to see how you actually add energy. And the reason this is so important is because everything we do in our life actually exerts the calories that we take in with food and either helps us feel better or worse. Couple quick quizzes, Caitlan. How many
Sure.
calories does a person burn walking a mile?
I'd say about 50.
That's because they're walking at a absolute snail's pace. Someone who's in shape like you is going to burn 80, 120, depending on the pace. Someone who's got more size like I do, I could burn as many as 130 or 40 calories if I'm walking that 15-minute mile pace, almost a jog rate. Now, but this is where it gets interesting in terms of energy and why these buckets are going to be so important. How many calories does a chess master burn in 2 hours of a high intensity competition?
I mean, initially I'd probably say you wouldn't think a lot, like 100, because it's not physical. You're sitting, playing a game. You're not really exerting what you deem energy.
But this is what happens when our heart pressure, our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up, when we care. Literally, studies have been done, and chess masters will burn as many as 560 calories in a 2-hour period. That's the equivalent of walking for that entire time. And this is why the things that drain us, we have to identify them and see how we can actually flip those experiences life on their head so that we're able to recharge. The first category we want to get into today is time, because when you spend your energy has everything to do with the way it impacts your life. So an Australian study was done of a tech firm, and what they found is people had 6 good hours of energy in each day. Now, when this comes to work, it means that the ideal work week is actually 30 hours. Now, you may be at the office more than that, but you really only have 6 great hours of performance. And so our first assessment for everyone today is, when are your best 6 hours? Are you a morning person, 5 or 6 to 11 or noon? Are you a midday person, 10 or 11 till 4 or 5? Or are you a night owl? Are you someone who likes to go from the late afternoon into the evening to do your work? How about you, Caitlan? Which are you? When are your best 6 hours?
Probably 9 to 3. I mean, I used to be a night owl, but I think life trampled that out of me. now I'm more of a,
Yeah. Is it the kids that trampled it out of you? Is it your healing and your ongoing recovery? What is it that changed it for you? Because that's really helpful data for people.
It was probably more my diagnosis and my illness, like with the meds that I take and how I have to structure my day. I'd say it shifted to that more 9 to 3, whereas I used to be a total night owl. Like my best time, most productive time would start at like 8 o'clock at night.
And this is where you have to, it's interesting how it changed with your life conditions. And whether it's family, whether it's the work that you do, whether it's the circumstances of your home life, whether it's the community you live in, you're going to change throughout your life as personality that we're about to talk about comes back to the middle, and you're not as extreme as you are earlier in your life. Your best times where your circadian rhythms give you energy because you're fired up to do the things you love to do, they may shift. So the first thing you have to do in terms of truly managing your energy is know when you are best. And during that 6 hours, you want to actually spend it doing the most important and difficult things. Now, you can't control this with kids, but how do you spend your best 6 hours from 9 to 3, Caitlan? Like, what's the work that you make or the life choices that you make sure get done during that best energy time block?
Yeah, some of it is kid management, getting them where they need to be, getting them set up for their day, whether it's lunches and to the bus and all of that. And now that they're all a bit older and in school, that's the time that I do both my career, which is education, and then a lot of my nonprofit work. They talked a little bit about Sisters at Heart and all of that, but that's when I block time to kind of get those things done, whether it's planning fundraisers, talking to hospitals that I'm working with, or anything like that.
So Benjamin Franklin was the original creator of time blocks, because he realized when he woke up in the morning that he would have 3 or 4 good hours before lunch, and then he'd have 3 or 4 good hours after lunch. And he would chunk out the work that he was doing. And then he had this interesting habit. At the end of the day, he would then look back and see, did I spend my time well? And so in addition to recognizing when your best 6 is, you want to actually look at the end of each day. Did I spend it on the chunks of work that are most important to me? Because every interruption, a UC Irvine study found, can cost you 23.5 minutes of actual focus on what you care about. And that's a whole large chunk, almost a 12th of what is your best energy during the day. And so we don't want to have these interruptions by actually blocking out our time on what we care about. And again, boundaries are things that matter when it comes to that big 6. What boundaries have you had to set in this new stage of your life, not only kiddos, but healing, to make sure that you protect your time?
Interesting. I probably haven't set enough up. You're making me think that I need to set some boundaries, because the derailing, like you're talking about, it's so prevalent, right? Like everyone calls, needs to, like, and if you don't kind of say like, no, this is the time I'm spending on this, it oftentimes wouldn't get done for me. So that, I think that's probably an area that I really need to work on, is setting boundaries around that 6 hours and what I want to get done in them.
Once you know your best 6, you chunk out the work or the efforts you want to spend that time on, and then you set pretty rigid boundaries. So when I'm working during the day as an executive coach and trainer, I'm not going to be interrupted by my college or professional athletes. I make time in the evening for that, because that's something I can do over a glass of wine or a cup of tea. It's not going to break into my more energy focused, intense time, because listening to athletes is very different than focusing on a conversation like this. So again, the skill is picking your best 6, time blocking, and then setting boundaries. But the second bucket of energy that's so important to all of us is around people. And this is where personality shows up. So some people are introverts. They get energy from being alone. They recover alone. And some people are extroverts, and they get their energy from being with people. They actually get fired up. They get physical, emotional, and spiritual energy from being with people. Now, here's a quick assessment, Caitlan, to see which you are. Would you rather, at the end of the day, be entirely alone? You're even going to kick the dogs and cats out of the house. Would you rather go to an intimate dinner party, 3 or 4 friends, could be at a house, could be at a quiet restaurant? Or would you rather go to a rager? And this could be a Red Sox game, this could be a big party, this could be a concert. Which of those 3 answers feels most comfortable to you at the end of a tired day?
Probably like a dinner party, just with like close friends or family, or, you know, that I definitely get a lot of energy and sort of drive from being around the people closest to me.
George Carlin had a line, you know what drives me crazy? People. And the reason that it was is because he was an introvert. Even though he was a performer, he got his energy from being alone. And I had a client I took care of in London at the beginning of the pandemic. And when we were talking about, hey, are you bothered not going in the office? She said, secretly, I love this, because she got to be alone with her partner and didn't have to worry about dealing with people. Now, she, as the pandemic has gone on, of course, is more interested in being with people, because over time, we all change and we all need people. The question is, what do you need to recover? Now, has it changed, Caitlan, over time? When you were younger, did you want people more, or have you been about the same throughout your life?
I think I've been about the same throughout my life. I think I'm pretty solidly an extrovert. I don't really love being by myself. I don't, like you said, it's not something that I can do it, you know, like I'll read a book or whatever, but it's not something that I would choose to do to like restore energy or, you know, derive happiness from it. I prefer to be with people.
On screen, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at an extrovert. That's what an extrovert sounds like. I'm what a middle sounds like. Now, I used to be Caitlan, but what happens to a lot of us, because I do so much people-centered work and I'm around people so much, even virtually these days, I need alone time. And I struggle even to spend time with friends and families in the evening these days, which is different than my colleague in London, who she never wants to be around anyone, ever, 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 ever. That's the super introvert. And the reason this is so important is because you've got to make time with people or alone to recover. People are not the problem. It's the exposure. It's the amount of time with people that'll either drive you crazy or give you energy. So how do you intentionally recharge with people these days, Caitlan? How do you actually build a schedule that has good chunks of recovery time with family and friends in that intimate way.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there's that pendulum swing too, like you talked about with COVID. I think when you are an extrovert and you get a lot from those interactions during COVID, that was hard. I mean, I was lucky. I have 3 kids and a husband, so I was constantly around people, but I do feel like now that we're coming a little bit on the backside and with COVID and vaccination and things opening up, it's all about scheduling.
That's
Because
it.
if I don't put it on the calendar, it won't happen. Like you said, you could go weeks without seeing somebody. So it's really about scheduling and just kind of saying, all right, at least one night this week, I'm going to reconnect with someone I haven't seen, or, talk to a family member. I mean, most of my family lives far away besides my parents. So it's more virtual or phone. I mean, another silver lining of COVID, Zoom, we've all discovered video calling and connecting, virtually versus in person.
But notice what Caitlan just said, going back to time blocking, you have to schedule your time with people or away from people. If you're an introvert, you have got to schedule downtime. If you don't, you're not going to heal. Your energy won't recover. If you're a people person, particularly in the weirdness of this time in world history, you have to book time with people, because otherwise it doesn't happen naturally. Remember when we just went outside and hung out with our neighbors and ran into people in the street and had hugs? Remember hugs? All of that has changed for those of us who are more extroverted, and you've got to book the people time. But that brings us to our third category, our third bucket that you have to fill, that's either a drain or a booster, and that is your focus. So the way you focus on recovery goes back to the categories that Caitlan brought back in her introduction, which is we either have physical, emotional, intellectual, or spiritual energy. And you've got to know what you're focused on in these forms in terms of recovery, because you can't do it all at once. You, number one, don't have time. Number two, just trying to focus on all of them is exhausting. So Caitlan, in your life right now, which are you focused on most? Physical, emotional, intellectual, or spiritual energy recovery?
Probably emotional.
And when you think about emotional recovery, I'm going to give categories for you at home to think about. There's high level recovery, engaged and intense, and then there's low level recovery. For you in emotional recovery, are you more interested in spending time with a therapist, lunch with a friend, or just journaling on your own as a way of paying attention to your emotions?
Probably lunch with a friend. Like I said, probably between COVID and going through a period in your life when you're really sick and you're a bit more isolated, it feels that you need to sort of rebuild some of those connections and things in your life that emotionally were meaningful.
So again, remember the categories here of focus. You're either going to do emotional, physical, intellectual, or spiritual. And then how intense do you want to be about that recovery? Because what your body, what your life needs is different from someone else. Now, what would be your second choice? If we're going to force rank these between emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual energy, which would you pick second, Caitlan? So emotional is first in terms of recharge. What's number 2?
Probably physical, because my illness it was so evident, how it impacted me physically. And I think in my life, I like to be active. And when you talk about things that are important, like this is just an example. I really love skiing with my kids. It's important to me. And, post-diagnosis, some of those things were really difficult. And so getting to a point where, you feel more physically able to do the things that are meaningful to you.
Now, again, remember the intensity scale. Are you more interested in working out, doing yoga, which hot yoga would count as working out? A normal yoga class is more on the middle level of intensity, though still physically difficult. Or are you interested in a spa day, including beauty treatments?
Probably a physical workout. I think that's just very for me, then I know I'm focusing on my physicality and getting to a place like where my heart functions better. So those things kind of they're just really important to me now, because I realize what it feels like not to have them. So it's more about that outward sort of exertion where you're like, yes, I'm really working on my physical, independence, like that.
Right.
I can.
For you, it's actually that physical exertion that matters. And I do that on a daily basis as well. And for me, the thing, if I'm going to choose right now in this assessment that I need most, I need a spa day, because that used to be part of my regular travels. I would hit the spa as part of a hotel tour, as part of a speaking gig. And I don't get that right now at the same level. And God knows I need a little hair and makeup work. And so to actually take care of me, to actually have that slightly extroverted experience of someone taking care of me, you might not expect it out of the guy given the training, but that's actually what my body is craving right now. The spa, I'm saying it, the spa time is what I need to recharge. And this is why we're not judging you, ladies and gentlemen, on what your answer is. You have to figure out the force rank of what kind of energy you want to build: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And then how intense do you want the experience of that recovery to be, or of that exertion to be? Which brings us to intellectual work. Would that be your third priority or your fourth priority, Caitlan?
Probably my third.
So would you rather write a book about your experiences you've had in healing, read a book about people healing or some topic that you're interested in, or just scan Twitter on topics around healing and wellness?
Probably right now, read a book.
Right? And so you're in that middle level of intensity. I've written books. I'm not in that place right now. I'm definitely in the read a book place. And for some people, you just want what we call bite-sized intellectual activity. That's Twitter, that's Facebook. Be careful with some of the social media, because it's more an addictive behavior than actual intellectual activity. But scanning a news feed, that's an example of the lower level of intellectual, still valuable, can still be energizing. And then it comes to that spiritual energy bucket. Would you rather go on a pilgrimage or a yoga retreat, Caitlan? Would you rather go to a service or a lecture, or a yoga class? Some of these count in both categories. Or would you rather just reflect quietly by a beautiful place?
Probably a pilgrimage, because it goes back to what you were saying before, where I feel like right now, where I am in my life, I'm pulled in a lot of different directions. And so when I do something, I want to kind of give 100% to it and be fully there. And I feel like when you say a pilgrimage, it's like I could really just focus on my spirituality and reconnecting with that in different ways, versus just like a little facet of it. But that probably speaks to where I am in life and just how many directions, you feel you're pulled in.
Yeah, you want that big time block to actually really focus on your spiritual, emotional life. And so at home, please answer the first question, which is, where do you want to focus? Physical, emotional, intellectual, or spiritual? You can do all of them, and yet you've got to do them in some sort of order. You've got to block out intentional time. And then how intense do you want the work to be? Because energy gets burned if it's done in a way that isn't your choosing. A study of college students found that when they chose their schedules, they were happier. They didn't necessarily perform better, but they were happier. And so happiness is choosing the level of intensity and the place you're going to develop your energy. So we've already given you the first three buckets: time, your best 6; people, with them more or with them less, chunk out that time; and then where you focus your energy work to actually manage it and build it and recover. The fourth category, though, is your brain and your mind and the number of thoughts that come on it. So your mind is the billboard of your brain. It's where all the messages, emotional, feeling, and thought show up. And so that billboard gets filled with all sorts of things. Now, the number of thoughts, emotions, and feelings that pop up on the billboard of your mind is known as how neurotic you are. So as introversion and extroversion is on the 5 factors, the big 5 personality validated by psychology, different than Myers-Briggs and some of these other tests, which are valuable, but they're not validated the way the 5 factors are. The number of thoughts that you have in your head, it's not good or bad. It just has an effect. So people who are neurotic get a lot done, but are prone to anxiety. Studies have found people who are less neurotic, they may get less done, but they're also more chill, but also can be prone to depression because they're doing less. And so I'm going to give you a quick assessment that you can all do at home. And you're going to rate yourself either 2, 1, or 0 points for each question. And you're either going to have 10 points down to 0 points. And it's going to tell you, again, this is not a validated assessment, but it's going to give you a quick test on how neurotic you are. How many thoughts pop up in your head? So, and Caitlin's not going to answer this one, but she's going to tell us at the end her general range. So now the first question is, are you a little volatile? If you're super volatile all the time, 2 points. If you're sometimes volatile, 1 point. If you're not volatile ever, 0 points. Are you easily stressed? If the answer is yes, 2 points. Sometimes 1 point. Hey, I'm totally chill all the time, 0 points. Do you struggle with anxiety? Yes, sometimes no. 2 points, 1 point, 0 point. Do you worry often? 2 points if the answer is yes, sometimes 1, 0 for no. And are you sensitive? 2 points for yes, 1 point for sometimes, 0 for no. Now, what's interesting about this quick assessment that you can do over and over again is it shows the level of thoughts, the number of thoughts you've got going in your brain. Too many thoughts too often is exhausting. Not enough thoughts can also, however, drain your energy. So give us your range, Caitlan. Where do you fall today versus sort of your normal cycle of things?
I was a 3 today.
Right? And the reason you do this quick test is that right now she's in a healthy place, enjoying this compelling workshop, getting to share her story, not worried about things. But where would you have put yourself during your worst times of illness?
Oh, I'm sure quite a bit higher. Like the worry and the anxiety, all that would have been a 2. So probably like an 8.
Right? So you've showed yourself not to be an extreme neurotic, period. But those spikes in life, and for all of us right now, COVID is a spike. Changes in life are a spike. They will cause extra neuroticism. And here's the good news. It's not bad. We playfully call someone neurotic. They're the people who get stuff done. They're the people who can solve problems. They think about all the complexity of the world. Don't be bothered by the fact that you are or aren't neurotic. Be ready to deal with it. And the first way is to notice that you are. Second, to continue to do mindful exercises like the practices we'll talk about throughout this series. You can go back and watch the one on emotion regulation and get some of those practices around emotion. Secondly, don't hesitate to journal, because when you have lots of negative thoughts, a negative emotion journal gets it out of your body. Third, do emotional recharge work. So whether your answer is talk to a therapist, talk to a friend, or just put those things down on paper, you actually have to do the homework to get the thoughts off the billboard of your head somewhere else so you can be blank, so you can just be okay for a while. So if you're having one of those bad days, Caitlan, where you just can't get the thoughts out of your head, what do you do?
You know, it's interesting when you were saying that, I thought about this, and it's not something I've shared with a lot of people, but when I first came out of the ICU, I was consumed with this thought of passing away and leaving these 3 kids that you haven't imparted, you know, all of life's lessons and skills on. And I decided that I was going to write what I called death letters. And, you know, my husband thought it was super morbid, but for me, it was super cathartic and they were positive letters about to the closest people to me about, you know, why I loved them and what I'd want for them in life. And it was a really healing exercise for me, even though I think other people thought it was quite strange. Just having it and knowing it was there if the worst did happen sort of let all those thoughts quiet in my head, and for me to kind of move past it. And I didn't really think of it as journaling, but it was an exercise of sort of saying what obviously I was scared I wasn't going to get to say, and then letting it be. So that, I guess, was my...
It's brilliant. You just made the permanent stage show. So it's a form of getting those thoughts off the billboard into the world so they don't get stuck in your head. The alarm in your brain, technically called the amygdala, will send negative signals until you deal with what it's worrying about, what it's afraid for. And so you actually put those letters. You were afraid that you weren't going to be able to tell people that you loved them and cared about them.
Yeah.
And by getting that out of your head, your alarm went, that's great. It's taken care of. The same thing is done with scheduling, Ben Franklin. The same thing is done with planning in terms of where you're going to focus your energy. You can do the same thing with these letters. Something I haven't talked about a lot. When I moved days before, after I graduated from high school, at graduation, I gave all my friends quite cheesy 18-year-old poems. But why did I do that? Because I didn't know how to say goodbye. And my neuroticism forced me to get it out on paper. And then I disappeared, but I didn't know what else to do. And so getting the thoughts out of your head with someone, could be a counselor, a friend, or on paper in any of these forms we talked about today, is the way you actually recharge your energy instead of letting those thoughts bring you down. We got 2 more buckets of energy management to explore. And the 5th in our total is the purpose of your communication. Because it turns out people have tendencies different than personality. They have tendencies in terms of the way they relate to others. And one of the things that we try and do in the way we listen and speak is either we try and be right. We want to control situations. We want to get to final answers. We want to solve problems, or we want to make people comfortable. We want to create emotional security. We want to make sure people feel good and like us. So which are you, Caitlan? Are you a debater who wants to be right in conversations? We'll ask your kids later. Or are you a pleaser who wants to make people comfortable in conversations?
No, I'm definitely a pleaser. I'm always trying to make people comfortable, and yeah.
Where does that give you energy? Where does it take it away?
Well, I drive a lot of purpose. I mean, a lot of the work I do now is about helping others and supporting other people. And I think being a mother, really sort of a caregiver once you have kids. But I think the negative side of that is oftentimes you say yes to too much, and you're always trying to keep everyone else happy, and you sort of forget about yourself in the equation. And like you said, how draining things are, or whether it's, something that you really want to spend your time doing. And so I think you get lost sometimes in that equation.
Brilliantly said. And again, this is not being a people pleaser. This is a new category that comes out of my book, Mastering Communication at Work. It's what are you trying to do with your communication? And if you're constantly communicating to make people comfortable, it's exhausting to do that all the time. But if you're constantly communicating to be right, you're going to cause agitation and frustration in relationships. And that also can be exhausting. The great part about being a debater is you're driving to answers. You're actually getting solutions. You're actually getting people to think about what's right in a situation. The twist on both sides is not a piece of advice, but a piece of sensitivity. Am I doing too much of one or the other? Because unlike personality, which is your preferences, your communication tendencies, like being a debater or a pleaser, are a choice. Am I going to debate right now, or am I going to please right now? We have tendencies, but everybody's capable of doing both. Do too much of either, and you end up in draining relationships and draining conversations. Which brings us to our last category for today: adventure. So in addition to purpose of communication, the number of thoughts in our head, the focus of our recharging, people, and time, adventure is one of these major categories that we really have learned about during COVID time that gives us energy if it's done in the right way. So this is also connected to the personality factor of how open you are. The more open you are, the more you need to be in creative and external activities to get yourself charged up. The more closed you are, the more you need routine and structure. So here's the way to get at it for you at home. When you think about a book, do you want to, at the high end, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, write a book after a world backpack tour? Or do you just want to start a new book? Again, the topic is adventure here. So Caitlan, for you, would you rather 10, go on a world tour and then write a book about all that backpacking travel that you're going to do as the world's now opening up, somewhere in the middle? Or would you be the person who just, I'm starting a new book, that's enough adventure for me in the world?
Oh no, I'd be a 10.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's so important to know, and that's your extroversion coming out.
Yeah.
And that's your love of people coming out. And so that's your love of skiing and activities coming out in terms of the high end of physical activity. So you got to know this at home. What's my level of adventure that I want? 10, tons of it. 5, some. 1, none. Here's another way of getting at it. 10, I want to visit every city Rick Steves has ever visited in his PBS famous show about traveling to different parts of the world. Or 1, I just want to watch Rick Steves. Where would you be, Caitlan? Would you want to go to every city? Go to some of
I'd be a 10. I'd want to go to every city.
And what we're learning from you right now is that you've got to actually have adventure in your life.
Yes,
I honestly haven't gotten on a plane since the pandemic started. Lots of my colleagues have, lots of people have, but my level of adventure is somewhere to a 5 or a 6. And if you ask me if I wanted to climb Mount Everest, climb a smaller mountain, or just watch a show on people who climb mountains, I'm not an Everest guy. I'm not a 10, but I'm probably more of a 7 or an 8. I've climbed a bunch of the 14ers in Colorado. And so for different places of adventure, the numbers may change, but you've got to assess, how much energy do I need? How open am I to an adventure? One more question. Would you want to travel to Paris to paint, 10, somewhere in the middle, take some art classes, or number 1, just look at Instagrams about art, where would you fall on that scale of 1 to 10?
I bet you can guess.
There it is. We're off to Paris and we're painting with Van
Yeah,
Gogh.
we're going to Paris.
So again, for you at home, the basic question is, how adventurous or open are you? 10 is extremely open. 1 is not open at all. I actually need structure and I need things to be simple. If you're in the middle, own that. Because if you can get the right amount of adventure in your life, if you can communicate as a debater sometimes and a pleaser other times, if you can manage the number of thoughts in your head, because it's not bad to have too many, they just have to be managed so they don't exhaust you. If you can focus on physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual energy building in the order for you, at the intensity that you want, if you can keep the right amount of people time in your life, and if you can block out time for the things that matter most when you have your best energy, those best 6 hours, now you're ready to recharge. And whether you're healing or already in a place that you're healthy, your energy will be at its best, and you can live the life that is closer to the mindful hopes that you have for you and your family. Caitlan, what did you learn most in today's wide-ranging conversation about energy management?
Well, it's interesting. I think everyone faces crisis in their life. Like mine obviously was a medical crisis, but I think people throughout their lives, everyone's going to experience some level of a crisis, whether it's financial, career, health. And I just found it interesting, there's a lot of focus on individualized medicine and, I'm in the educational world, so IEP, which is an individual education plan. So I thought about it and I'm like, why isn't mental health and our mental state also individualized? And I think that's the tools that you set out are just that. Like, how do we manage it as an individual, recognizing who we are and what's meaningful to us and how that shapes our mental health. And, I found that really powerful. Like you have actions that people can actually take and steps to, to better optimize their energy, their mental health, which I think is of the utmost importance right now for many different reasons. For everyone, it's different, but it was excellent. So thanks. It was a great conversation.
And what's so important is that it's different for everyone. You've got to fill these boosters or these drains your way. You want a little more information about being more mindful? You can go back and watch last month's session on emotion regulation. This video will be available for you to send to your friends on how to manage your energy. And we have 4 more sessions in our 6-part mindful series. To be mindful is to be present. It's to be aware. It's to be conscious. And every single one of us can grow that level of consciousness when we pay attention to these places where we need to be more attentive and more ourselves. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. It's been a privilege to spend time with you, Caitlan. You are a star. We're so grateful.
Thank you, Jon. Hello to my family. Some of my family logged on from far away, so I have to give them a shout out.
Total privilege. Thank you for all. You're not only sharing of your story, which is so rich, but also the wisdom that you had to give us today. Katie, thank you for having us, and take it away.
Thanks, Jon.
Thank you both so much to Jon and Caitlan. What an incredible story and conversation. I hope everybody can make the 3rd part of this series on November 30th. The topic will be stress management, which feels incredibly appropriate as we will be heading into the holidays. So with that, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And I hope that we can all go into the weekend with a better sense of ourselves, our energy, and how to balance it all.
Have a great day, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thanks.